It's nice of you to join us. I am Katrina. I'm one of the Adult Services librarians, and we also have Bill with us today. He's our head of IT. And today we're going to be talking about privacy. This will be recorded, so if there's anything you missed during our presentation, or if there's anything you want to review, we'll post it later on and send you guys links so you can review it at that time. You should have a PDF that I emailed to you. It's a big handout, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And I think that covers all of the housekeeping. There will be questions if anybody has questions at the end as well. So, what is privacy? We're going to talk about what you need to know, why you should care, all the different privacy laws and rules that are out there, how privacy and libraries go hand in hand. And we're also going to talk about the good stuff, how you can protect your privacy, the settings that you should know and do on your phones and computers and tablets to make sure your information is safe.
So I have a question now. So what is your definition of privacy? If you're here live with us, go ahead and put that in the chat. If you're watching this after if you're watching the recording, go ahead and just think about that definition here for about a minute. Let's take about a minute to go over this. Okay, thanks, Pamela. Others do not have access to my private information. That's
a good one. Okay. So what is privacy? Pamela had a good suggestion. We're going to go back a little bit further, though, to one of the original definitions of privacy. Privacy is the right to be let alone. This is from a couple of attorneys back in 1890, Warren and Brandeis. The Kodak camera was invented during this time. It is the first time anything like it has ever been created that can capture the doings of other people. They were really concerned about this camera and the rise of paparazzi, people laying in wait and snapping pictures of others without their permission and their consent. And they felt that it was a concern that photographs would be invading the sacred precinct of private and domestic life. Now, 1890 was a long time ago. We do have more modern definitions of privacy, but the one that has been traditionally accepted as the definition of privacy is by a guy, Alan Weston. This is from 1967, so still a little older. But he said that privacy is the right of individuals to control, to edit, manage, and delete information about themselves, and to decide when, how, and to what extent information is communicated to others. It's very comprehensive. It basically says you have the right to your own space, your own information. He wrote this because the computer was invented. This is when the mainframe computer came into existence and the world as we knew it was vitally changed.
And building on that, it talks about privacy providing a space for discussion, growth, and learning. If you can't edit, delete, or share the information that you create on your own, and it's just shared by other people, you don't really have control of that privacy. It's also the ability to control your information and then maintain boundaries. So certain groups don't see the information you're looking at, or things along those lines.
So we have a demonstration for you. We are going to use an ad blocker extension called Ghostery. You probably use the internet all the time. You go to Facebook, you check the news, check the weather. What you probably don't know is that a lot of those things have trackers. They're checking to see what device you're using. They're checking to see what kind of advertising might be applicable to you, and a whole bunch of other things. Ghostery will show us how many things are tracking us at any given time on a certain website. And Bill is going to do this demonstration for us.
So everybody sees a Google window here. Okay, so I'm going to go to a site, checkondetroit.com. Or click on Detroit, I'm sorry. Which is a website that is the Channel 4 website. And if we look at the Ghostery window here, this is in Firefox. It shows me that there are 11 trackers attempting to load on this system here. And it's gone through and it's blocked 6 of them because most of them are, some people are saying they just see the ghostery thing. Katrina, could you just stop sharing temporarily?
Yep.
See if that works for this. We did test this earlier and it seemed to work.
Yep, you should be good now.
Okay, now everybody can see my screen. Fantastic. So you see here, this is the Click on Detroit website, Channel 4 News. And it shows here in the upper right corner, this is where I have Ghostery. It's a little ghost here in the upper right corner, and it's got an 11 next to it. The 11 is the number of trackers or things that it has found as it's reviewed the website as it's brought up. So there are a group of advertising ones. There's at least one that is listed as essential. A group of site analytics. Site analytics are, what browser are you using? Where are you coming from? That sort of things. And then one that just says unknown. So it doesn't even know what that tracker is, but it knows it's a tracker and it blocked it. So that's a lot of different things that you can see here. So there's a lot of different trackers that have come through. And so these are the things that are watching what you're doing on this website. But if without the Ghostery plugin, they would just run and it would be, it would be tracking what you're doing. You wouldn't know exactly what's going on. Looking at that same site on, oh, I'm sorry, that was my Google Chrome one. I apologize. So I also have the one that is Firefox here. And it comes up with just 8 trackers. The reason why is because different browsers, and we're going to go over this a little bit later, but different browsers handle trackers differently depending on their default settings. So this one, Firefox didn't even let 3 of them get through to Ghostery to be tracked, to be blocked. Firefox in its default state just blocked them itself. So all of these advertising ones, the essential one, and the site analytics one were trapped, but not that one that was labeled as unknown. So now you can see with that thing, how many things are actually watching what you're doing on their websites.
Thank you, Bill. And if anybody has any questions or if you're interested in downloading that, we can help you do that at the very end of the presentation. Okay. So we're going to briefly go over what privacy isn't. There are a lot of common misconceptions and myths, and we're going to address 2 of those big ones today. The first one is privacy and secrecy are the same. They are not. They are very different, although it is a subtle difference. Privacy is about being unobserved. That's it. You can walk around, do your own thing without worrying about someone watching you while you're doing it. Secrecy is about intentionally hiding something, taking information, taking an activity, and intentionally keeping it from other people.
And then the other big myth is that privacy and security are the same thing. They're not. Privacy, again, is about safeguarding your identity, just making sure that people don't see what you're doing when you're going about your daily business. And security is protecting that from active people attempting to take it from you. So trying to keep your information and data secured is not the same as keeping it private.
Yeah.
Yes, so one of the big things we talked about with the evolving concerns of privacy is that now, talked about the Kodak camera back at the beginning, well, now everything's a camera. You have cameras, there's cameras on my computer because otherwise you wouldn't be able to see me. There's cameras in your phone. There's microphones in your phone. There's cameras tracking the people who are driving down the street to do, for red light cameras, things like that. I think it's like 1984 by George Orwell, where Big Brother is always watching. We're not to that. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to scare everybody saying that that's where we're at, but that is the idea that people get with all of this sort of stuff. Then with social media now, people can put up photos of anybody else, and they can actually tag them. So let's say you were walking down the street and somebody got you in the back of a picture. They could tag you and send that, and without your knowledge, and then somebody would know exactly where you were at that time. Okay, these are definite privacy concerns, and also the ability to share photos without asking, which is a default setting on a lot of our social media, where anyone can share your photos. And what people do with that, there's many companies that use that data. They mine that data and use it like currency, just like any money. Like 23andMe, which is the DNA facility that checks out for, or Ancestry.com, who check for familial relations, that sort of thing. Google collects all sorts of information. And there are other companies that do all of this as well.
So why should you care? Why do you think privacy is important? Why should it matter? And this is, active participation. So if you want to type in the chat, you can. If you're watching from home at a later time, feel free to reflect on it. Why does privacy matter to us? And to give you a little reflection, we have a quote up here from Edward Snowden, probably heard of him. He says that saying you don't care about privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. We'll take a few seconds to think on this. Okay. So, why does privacy matter?
Privacy gives you intimacy. Basically, where you can share information with a small group of people and expect it to stay within that small group of people. Gives you identity. You can have information about yourself that no one else knows. You have your own identity, the stuff that you like and you maybe don't want to tell other people. And then the same thing with that autonomy, the ability to keep things to yourself. Stuff that I walked to the store today. Not everybody on the planet needs to know that.
Yeah. It's giving yourself the space to do what you need to without fear of retaliation from others. Privacy can give you freedom of thought and speech, not worrying about what you say or doing making you a target. It lets you have the freedom of social political views and activities. You can be a Republican or Democrat, and privacy allows you to promote those and advertise those and celebrate those in the way that you want without fear of being judged for it. It gives you control over your life. It lets you have respect for individuals to be who they are as they are. It also helps create social boundaries. What happens at home does not need to be talked about at work. You don't have to tell Susan how her weekend was, or if she asks what you did. You can give her as much or as little detail as you want, because that is your private life, that is your right, and frankly it's a personal preference. You don't have to tell anybody anything if you don't want to. So all that information on privacy, we have an example of a data policy here. Data policies or private policies are privacy policies are things that companies come up with to tell you how they are going to use your data. This one's from Facebook. I didn't realize how long it was until I started recording it, but it's telling you how it's going to save your data. It keeps track of your location. It keeps track of what devices you use. It'll take your information that you post, like your birthday, your profile information, page likes, group likes, and it will use that for its advertising. It will use that to sell information to third parties. Not every privacy policy is like that. Some of them will actually keep your information private. But most of the time, these are to protect the company, not you. And it's good to know what a company's privacy policy says, because that'll tell you what they're doing with your information.
And just remember, you've also agreed to that by using their site. You've agreed to their privacy policies when you start using their site.
Yeah, that's important to know. If there's something you don't agree with on their privacy policy, the only option you have nowadays is to not use it. That privacy policy is a contract between you and the company. So what happens when your privacy is violated? I went through and found, and there have been information breaches and privacy violations since the time of the computer, but these are the most recent ones, and these are the biggest ones that have happened in the last few years. So in 2018, you have the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal. I'm sure some of you saw it on the headlines everywhere. It was a massive issue. Cambridge Analytica is a group at Cambridge University, and they just had a simple goal in mind. They wanted to create an app that gathered user information based on informed consent and just wanted to kind of analyze it and do stuff with it. And the user group they wanted to use was Facebook, because Facebook has a ton of users, right? Well, Facebook not only allowed this app to collect personal information from Facebook users, but also these Facebook users' friends without consent. So ultimately, it gathered as little as, there's not an exact number because it was such a big breach, but it's estimated that it was as little as 30 and as many as 87 million Facebook users took all their information without consent, starting from 2013. So it took all of this information from these millions of users. It used it to create a psychological profile on them, so to see what their interests were. Maybe they were conservative or liberal, and it sold these profiles to political campaigns. So during the 2016 election, campaigns from Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, and a whole bunch of other people bought that information and used it to target advertising to them. It was a really, really big deal. And Facebook did tighten up some of their security afterwards and gave people more control over the privacy settings that they had. If you're interested in learning more about this, Netflix actually just came out with a documentary last year called The Great Hack, and it goes into really, really deep depth on this whole scandal.
Next, we've got the Equifax credit disaster. This was a security breach as well as a privacy breach, because cyber criminals accessed approximately 145.5 million US Equifax customers' personal data, including their full names, their social security numbers, their birth dates, addresses, and driver's license numbers. And also approximately 200,000 of those users had their credit card logins stolen. And yeah, these were all passed around and sold, said as data as currency. Then the last one, yes, Ashley Madison. Ashley Madison is a dating site. And you probably heard this one in the news as well, as this one was all over the news too. A hacker group leaked 60 gigabytes of company data, which is really a lot of data, including the user's details. Details like their personal information, so like their real names, their home addresses, their search history, and credit card transaction records, which is something that in this particular breach was something that had a lot of problems with that, because a lot of their privacy had been broken in this thing. They thought they were secure and safe and private. Well, that breach did not go well for a lot of people.
Yeah. And that's what brings us to our next part. We hear about how privacy is important as a day-to-day personal life basis, but we don't really see how it's protected on a bigger level. So just to show you, we're not going to go through all of these, but these are all the big privacy laws and regulations that exist in our country, internationally, and some of the big ones at state level even, to protect our privacy in different areas. So internationally, you have the GDPR, which was the biggest privacy protection passed, and it happened just a couple of years ago. And it provides, you've probably seen a lot of updates when it happened about changing privacy policies to match the GDPR regulations. But federally more applicable to us, we've got stuff like HIPAA, which is privacy for health industries. So when you go to the hospital, it prevents your doctor from gossiping about your patient record with other people. You've got FERPA, which prevents people from talking about student records with other people. You've got whistleblower protections and privacy acts and a whole host of other things. And we do have one that's not on here that's coming out later. They're trying to pass it. That actually focuses on digital privacy, because as long as the computer's been around, we still don't have a concrete digital privacy law that's encompasses what we've talked about so far, just to give you an idea.
And so as a library, we take your privacy very seriously, privacy and confidentiality. And in fact, in the state of Michigan, we have the Library Privacy Act, which was written and enacted in 1982, where it states that any items that are contained in a patron's library record cannot be released without consent of the library record owner, which would be the person, the patron. That means, we can't give, I can't tell a husband what books his wife has checked out. Same way, the other way around. Things that we found interesting that were part of a library record was actually video. So if somebody asked, was this person actually in the library at this point? Can I see the video? Absolutely not. That is part of their patron record. All of their checked out materials that they've ever checked out, they're not even stored. So we don't keep that information even, except for the fact that we have, except by written consent. And the written consent, we go through a written consent here at the Clarkston Library, where we give out multiple library cards with the same numbers on them. So a patron can hand a card off to a spouse or whoever else, and then they can act as that same person. That is our procedure and form of written consent. So this is a state law that is actually under review this year, but it is a state law that we've been following. So if you've ever been here and asked to see something on a different person's record and we're told you are not, there is this law that is keeping us from doing that.
And I do want to tack on to this part real quick, because it is a law. If the police come in and they want to see a patron record, maybe someone was caught doing something a little sketchy and they want to see if they checked out any books on, say, bomb building. They are not allowed, we are not allowed to give them that record unless they have a search warrant. And even then it's a very specific time. And many library systems don't actually save your history because, it's a privacy thing. So if the police come in, they have a search warrant and we want to see that person's account, sorry, we don't have a record of it anymore. And that leads me to the next part of libraries and privacy. I am a librarian. I have to abide by the American Library Association's rules and guidelines as a professional, as a library worker. And they actually have it coded into their, they have a code of ethics. We have a Bill of Rights that outlines what a professional in the library should be doing. And it's coded in there. We protect every library user's right to privacy and confidentiality with respect to anything that you check out or want to look up at the library. That means we will never judge you for a book that you check out. We will never give you funny faces or ask questions about something you want us to help look up. We will not talk about what you do with other people. We are a place of privacy and respect, and we will never try to violate your privacy if we can help it. So now comes the fun part. We're going to talk about tools and resources.
So the handout that you guys were emailed contains links and all that stuff to all of these tools that we're going to talk about today. So these are some of the tools that we use here and that we recommend to use in general purpose, in general usage. So the first block that we're going to talk about is web browsers. So the web browser is what you get to the internet with. Okay, if you use Google Chrome, that's not considered a privacy-based browser. It is owned by Google, and it remembers a lot of things for you. But if you use something like Firefox, which is designed with privacy in mind, a lot of those features that you can turn on and off are already disabled by default. The Brave browser, which is a slightly more advanced browser, it is based on the Chrome browser engine, the back end of it, but all of its privacy-based settings are turned on by default. And then, as it was mentioned earlier, somebody was talking about the Tor browser. Tor, which is actually an acronym for the Onion Router because of the way it works. It hops from place to place. it's a much more advanced browser, but it is designed with security in mind. But as was mentioned before, that the more secure you make something, the more private you make something, many times it does slow down a bit. You start to notice lag and things like that. So it is a trade-off. That's true. And now the newest version of Microsoft Edge, which was based on Chrome as well, it's just like Chrome. It just has a different face on it, put on by Microsoft.
So the next thing that we want to talk about are search engines. I'm sure many of you have Googled something before. How do I sew this edge together? How do I cook Brussels sprouts? As I have recently looked up. But like Bill was talking about, anything that's a Google product doesn't make it inherently bad. It just makes it inherently less private. And the search engine in particular, which is what Google is known for, Google search engine is algorithm based. So this means when you look something up, Google checks your web activity, your web browsing activity. It looks at your search history to see what you've looked up in the past. And it looks at your location based on your computer's address. Every computer has an address that tells you roughly where you're located, or your phone, which has GPS on it. And it looks at all of these things and it gives you results based on that. So they're relevant. Oftentimes they're very convenient because it's what you want to see, but Google has taken all of your information to find that information for you. So some privacy-focused browser search engines are ones that we listed above. They're a little funny named. You've got DuckDuckGo, you've got Quant, you've got SwissCows. All of these are built with privacy in mind. You can put in your little search and it will give you results based on the words you enter in the box. It's not going to try to look at anything else. It's not going to try finding what you've looked up before. It's not going to look at your location. It's just like, oh, she wants to know how to cook Brussels sprouts. Here are your Brussels sprouts links. And again, if you look at your handout, we have links to these if you want to try to look at their website a little more. And at the end, we can also show you how to set it up on your own computer or device. But if you try them or you're thinking, gosh, I really don't want to try something new, when you use Google, you can get around some of the tracking by using incognito mode, which is like a private mode browsing. It turns off some of that default tracking, and that's something we'll talk about shortly as well. The next big one, antivirus, anti-malware. Found this little blurb from our cybersecurity government agency. If you connect it, protect it. So when you go to the internet, you got the world literally at your fingertips, but also the world is at your computer. You have to be very careful about what you click on because things can get installed or downloaded without you knowing. And you got things like viruses. They can slow down your computer. They can delete your files. They can install something that you will never see, but it's watching everything you do. It can be scary stuff, and ultimately they're not something you want on your computer. So antivirus will actively watch and remove those kinds of things. So the one that I personally use, Malwarebytes, they have a free version and they have a paid version. Both work very well. The only difference is one will automatically scan and one you have to run manually. We've got Symantec. CCleaner is a little bit milder of a version. They do cleaning up of files on your computer slow, but they do have some built-in removal as well. The library uses ESET. Sophos is kind of a higher grade one for a lot of companies use it. And you've got Windows Defender, where it's built into Windows Computer. So if you use a Windows device, a Windows tablet, like a Surface or a normal desktop, this is oftentimes, it should be installed on there already. And most of those settings by default are pretty good. And again, these are all linked to the handout if you want to look at them a little more.
And then another piece of software that people have started to use much more are password managers. Password managers are pieces of software that allow you to remember a single key password, a long, one that you can remember, that unlocks a database of your passwords. So you can have a whole bunch of passwords that you use, but you don't have to continuously use the same ones over and over again, which is what a lot of people do it. And for until I realized it, I did the same thing. I was using very similar passwords all over the place. But now with a password manager like LastPass is one of those, is a free and has a pay tier. KeyPass and KeyWeb, which are both free, and then there's Dashlane, which again, a lot of these companies have both free tiers, and then there's additional features if you pay for them. I have to remember one password that logs me into my password database of encrypted passwords that I don't even have to know what they are. I can set it up and I can have it assign passwords for me that are random. So that helps, not reusing passwords all over the internet. It makes it much harder to lose that. The second thing is these two-factor authentication programs. A lot of like social media and banks and other things like that will have a second thing that you have to have, where it's usually a code that's on some sort of device that they'll either, if it's a bank, they'll issue you a key fob of some sort that will auto-generate a number that changes every 60 seconds. And that's what this two-factor authentication is talking about. That, or, hey, this seems to be a new device. We're gonna send you an email to make sure this is you. Those are the sorts of things that you run into in two-factor authentication. You'll see this in a lot of websites now because they're starting to get security and privacy conscious as well. The last one is a virtual private network. Virtual private network basically says, like, you go to, let's say you go over to Starbucks and you are using their Wi-Fi. To protect your data, you can set up a virtual private network across the internet where all of your data is encrypted as it leaves your computer into their network. So no matter what people are doing on the Starbucks Wi-Fi, if they're listening for data, if they're doing all these sorts of things, it's encrypted from end to end. So people can use this to work at their house, at their corporation, and it's just like a tunnel. It builds this impregnable tunnel between you and another server. All of these things protect your data as they go by. And then I think this is me too. Yep. Okay, so yeah, again, in the handout, you have information, including images, as how to turn on a lot of these changes into your browsers, like enabling private browsing mode, which is in Google is called incognito mode, that sort of thing, those do not tracking options. And there's also links to some of the extensions that we use for ad blocking. And then there's a section on Windows 10, how to see what is able to track your location, who's able to use your camera and microphone, and what your privacy settings are that you had installed when you first started the computer up. And then that third section there is the one that everybody's got around now, smartphones and tablets. There are lots of privacy settings specific to individual applications, in Apple's or in Androids. Those are the primary ones, because those are the two smartphone systems that are really out there anymore. We don't talk about other ones like Windows and some of the other ones, but I'm sure they have app permissions too, but the vast majority of people have either an Android or an Apple phone, and those screens are in that thing. Talks about, like for example, my Samsung phone has, every individual app can have a set of permissions to use the camera, but it can also say I can have the location data only when I'm using the app or all the time. These are the sorts of settings you can set in the smartphones.
So that covers a large portion of the devices you use, but what about the applications and apps and stuff like that? So we have a brief section on the handout about email settings. Gmail and Yahoo are the big ones, and those have settings for advertising and location tracking and two-factor auth. Those you can go through. Social media is a really big one. And the big things you want to look for when you're doing a social media account. So if you use Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or Snapchat or anything like that, you want to make sure your profile is set to private, because by default, a lot of them are turned on to public, which means anybody around you across the world can go to your profile, see what you're doing. And the other thing that you want to check for is turning off tracking for advertising, because that's what it goes through all of the stuff you post. It goes through all of the things that you like, and it takes that information and tries to sell you stuff. So that's what targeted advertising is. It looks at all of your information, it takes your data and spits stuff out because it knows what you're going to want to see. And I do have Facebook pulled that as kind of a separate section because of how big that platform is. Facebook has significantly increased the settings that you can change. You can change privacy settings to see who can see your posts, who can see your stories, who can see your photos, who can see your profile information. All of those things can be changed. You can also change your security settings, your location settings. Again, by default, these are all turned on. So it's not a bad idea to go through them and just poke around. You can't break anything. It's very hard to break stuff nowadays. You just go through settings and see what everything looks like. If you are maybe tired of Facebook or the privacy stuff makes you a little nervous, you don't have to use Facebook itself. The Messenger app does work independently of it. So that is something to keep in mind. The Messenger doesn't have, it's related to Facebook, but it doesn't have as many privacy concerns. We do have a little bit on the handout for additional resources. If you're interested in what we've talked about today, or you just kind of want to learn a little more about privacy, these are all some really good introductory resources. The TED Talk is phenomenal. I think it's only 15 minutes. The foundations that are up there are privacy focused ones, so you can see what the conversation is like on those. And then the last one is actually our government cybersecurity agency, and they have a ton of awesome tip sheets and resources of basic things you can do either at work, at home, when you're out in public, and they make it very easy to learn how to make those changes. If you ever want to look at our references, you can check it out when we email our presentation in a little bit, and that wraps it up.